baby, what we gon' do? Yo. Tell me, girl, what you wanna do? Yo. Cause I ain't waiting on you. I ain't waiting on you. Cause I ain't really got no time. I ain't really got no time to waste on you. To waste on you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mets Live Show. I'm your host, Rasheed McDonald, and this is part one of the 2025 New York Mets overview. For the next couple of days, we're going to be going over the key position players at every single position, and we're going to talk about how they can provide some success to the 2025 New York Mets and how important that will be. For part one, we're going to start with the infield. In 2024, the New York Mets shocked the baseball world. They took down one of the best teams in the National League, the Philadelphia Phillies. They reached the NLCS after a miraculous comeback in the final wildcard game against the Milwaukee Brewers, a team that gave them trouble all season long. Now, as we head into the 2025 season, the Mets' success was built on key contributions from the infield. Jose Iglesias provided stability, Mark Vientos finally broke out, and Pete Alonso delivered a legendary postseason. Francisco Lindor was everything the Mets needed, and then some. But it wasn't just them. Jeff McNeil was on fire to start the second half before an injury sidelined him for the season. And when the Mets needed an emergency production in the infield, Luisangel Acuna stepped up in one of the biggest stretches of the season, filling in for Lindor during a grueling 10-day stretch in which they faced the Philadelphia Phillies 7 times. So what does the Mets infield look like heading into the 2025 season? Let's talk about it. First, we're going to start off with Francisco Lindor, who we all believe should be the Mets captain. In 2024, Francisco Lindor had a season that, to be honest, was very debatable whether it should be MVP quality or caliber, right? In the past, I've talked about how former Triple Crown winners or Triple Crown winners of a season did not go on to win the MVP, like Ted Williams and Lou Gehrig. Now, I thought that Francisco Lindor did everything he could or needed to give Shohei Ohtani a run for his money. Here's a few things that I considered. A DH has never won the MVP award for the simple fact that they don't play the field. So, while Shohei Ohtani played a lot of games virtually every single day, he only played half the time. Francisco Lindor, on the other hand, he played almost every single day until his back started barking on him a little bit in that Philadelphia Phillies series. So let's take a look at Francisco Lindor's numbers. In 2024, he averaged .273 with 33 home runs, 91 RBIs, slugged .500, and had an OPS of .844 for the season. And now, it could have been his second consecutive 30-30 season for the New York Mets, but again, we go back to the back injury. Now, one of the things that Francisco Lindor did last season to really cement his case into being the MVP was that he had some at-bats that really changed the course of several games. Let's go to the September 11th game, the New York Mets facing the Toronto Blue Jays in the final game of that series. They're getting no hit by Francis Bowden. About it. And they're down to the final at-bats. Top of the ninth, Francisco Lindor, first man up, delivers the game-tying home run. Pivotal. It allowed the Mets bats to get hot, feed off of that momentum, and they went on to win that game. Now, Francisco Lindor did get hurt But when he came back, you talk about the final day of the season, and they had to play 2 more games against the Atlanta Braves. That was washed out during the hurricane. In that game, Francisco Lindor came up, and it was a magnificent game. Braves had a lead for a long stretch of the game. Come into the 7th or 8th inning, the Mets come back, take the lead. They bring in their closer. I believe it was in the 8th inning. He gives up the lead. In the top of the 9th, Francisco Lindor gets the lead back for good. The Mets send back out their closer, and he finishes the game. Francisco Lindor propels the Mets to the postseason with a magnificent performance at the plate. That was the type of MVP level performance or player that Francisco Lindor was in the 2024 season. And I believe this year he's going to put up a similar type of production. We're talking about a guy who's posted almost every single day. And he intends to continue doing the same for as long as his body allows him to. Now, do I think the Mets will be a little bit more cautious as we head toward the dog days of the summer? Yes. But if they're in a situation where they absolutely need Lindor to play every single day, then of course Francisco Lindor is going to play whenever the team needs him to play. But I think if they're up, if they need a rest here or there, maybe once a series or maybe once a week, they will do whatever they can to make sure that Lindor is ready and capable of performing in the postseason. Which he did, because he provided the final nail in the coffin for the Philadelphia Phillies in Game 4 of the NLDS. And it was a magnificent game and a magnificent at-bat. Grand slam, gives the Mets the 4-1 lead. Mets will add on, and they will win the game. And that's exactly the type of MVP performance that was needed. Even when the Mets were down 1-0 to the Dodgers, he came back in Game 2 to lead it off with the home run. That is Francisco Lindor. That's what the Mets are getting at the shortstop position. And we're going to be talking about some of the guys that will be playing behind him. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about the other position. We're going to move on to third base and Mark Vientos. Mark Vientos did not start the season with the Major League Ball Club. To begin the 2024 season, the Mets sent him down to AAA to make way for DH JD Martinez and to give Brett Baty his shot, his shine to play the third base position. Now, while Brett Baty started strong defensively at third, offensively, his bat just was nowhere to be found. And it really put the Mets in a bad spot because there was virtually no production coming from that position. Now, when Starling Marte had to go on the IL because of the birth of his child, the Mets called up Mark Vientos. He delivered a walk-off home run against the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, you think that would be enough to keep him with the Major League Ball Club. Wrong again. Marte comes back from the paternity list, and Vientos goes back down to AAA. Now, what does Vientos do? I mean, he should have made the team out of spring training. He should have got the at-bats after Brett Baty proved that he wasn't capable of playing the position. And then he got called up when Marte went on the paternity list. But he didn't pout. He kept chugging along. When Mate strolled around and he got his next opportunity and his next chance, and the Mets sent down Brett Baty and they called up Mark Vientos did not let go of that position. He held on like a vice grip. He went on to provide a 266 average, a 27 home run season that could have been 30 plus if he would have played the entire season. 71 RBIs, a 516 slugging percentage, and an 837 OPS. That was the type of production that Mark Vientos gave the Mets from the third base position. And a move that they've admitted they were wrong in their initial evaluation in giving Brett Baty the first crack at it. But you know what? You got to give people the benefit of the doubt when they understand that they made a mistake and they made the wrong call. And that's exactly what the team did, and they rewarded him with extensive playing time, and they gave him the rest of the season. And in the postseason, he went and he provided even more production. The best offensive player for the Mets in the postseason was Mark Vientos, by a long shot. And that proves that with patience, with time, with determination, a player can succeed. And that's going to lend to some of the next guys we're going to talk about. But before we get to them, we're going to talk about second base. Second base is going to be very, very crowded because the Mets, who did not sign Pete Alonso to just recently, were thinking about mixing and matching who they were going to put in the infield if the infield was going to be void of Pete Alonso. But they had conversations and boom. Right before the start of spring training, they strike a deal with Pete Alonso, and Pete Alonso is going to be on the Mets. Now, at Amazing Day, this discussion came up because there was a lot of talk, but I felt like there wasn't enough talk about where this puts Jeff McNeil. Now, Jeff McNeil received a contract extension some years back, and now he's almost done with that contract. And the last two seasons haven't been the best production-wise for Jeff, even though he did start the second half very, very strong before getting injured. But Jeff McNeil cannot afford to have another slow start. It doesn't bode well for him to start the season slow because of the simple fact that you have two guys on his back. So let's take a look at some of Jeff McNeil's numbers from last year. 238 average, 44 RBIs, a slugging percentage of 384, and an OPS of 692. Now, he did suffer the broken wrist, and he returned in the NLCS against the Dodgers. Didn't do anything productive there. Now, this goes back to the conversation when Francisco Lindor got hurt. A player stepped up, seamlessly stepped up, and provided very much needed offensive help. So now what does this do? So at Amazing Day, I had the privilege of asking Mets manager Carlos Mendoza if there is going to be a competition at second base. Now his answer, though very straightforward and strong, which is one of his best, one of his strong suits, his answer was, kind of cryptic and very, very pronounced. He said that Jeff McNeil was going to be a very big part of the 2025 season and that he had a very good off season. Now, the second part of that answer I did not understand. Now, I'm going to have you guys take a look for yourself and how he answered that question, but at the end of that clip, we're going to talk about what I think is going to happen. Take a look. Is there going to be a competition at second base, or is Jeff McNeil going to be the second baseman?
Jeff McNeil is an important part of this team. You know, obviously the outfield reps with the guys that we got in the outfield at the beginning is probably going to be limited. But Jeff McNeil is, as we sit here, he's a big part of this team. So, and he's having a really good offseason.
So as you can see, again, very straightforward with his answer, but still, what does it mean that he had a good offseason? I don't know. I don't know what that means. Now, there's a few things on the Jeff McNeil front that we want to kind of approach this, right? So, manager says he had a good offseason. Player goes back to his fundamentals. He plays golf in the offseason, but he comes back with something different. Now, for years, we've all known that Jeff McNeil swings a bat with no knob at the end. This season, Tom Verducci, great reporter, tremendous reporter, noticed something. He was using a Louisville Slugger with a knob at the end. And his answer, which we're about to play right now, was very, very, very interesting. And what I think might not be the best approach for Jeff McNeil. But let's take a look at what Tom Verducci had to say about Jeff McNeil using a bat with a knob at the end.
Right away with Jeff McNeil, I saw what was different. His bat. You remember back in the day, he had one of those old school bats, no knob at the bottom, thick handle. And he gets into the cage and had live BP, and it's a different bat. It's a more traditional one with that knob at the bottom. I asked him about it, and if you recall, in the second half of last season, Jeff slugged over 500. And in the offseason, he said, you know what? I want to continue to do that, to hit for power, not for average. He worked especially on getting his bat speed up. And to do that, he went to the more traditional bat. So I think if you're the Mets, you're looking at Jeff McNeil not as the former batting champion, but as a guy who's going to give you some pop at second base right now.
Jeff McNeil is using this bat with a knob at the end, which he's never used before. And now Jeff McNeil has never been this overly, he could hit for tremendous amounts of power type of player. He's never been that kind of guy. What he has been in the past is a very, very good gap-to-gap hitter, hits for good average. Well, we look at Luis Arraez, but with a little bit more gap-to-gap power, right? Jeff McNeil, if positioned well, right, can be a much more versatile, average, on-base type of threat than Luis Arraez, who, is going to get you your singles. But he's not going to impact the game in a way that Jeff McNeil in 2022 did. Now, Tom Verducci saying that Jeff McNeil wants to approach this season with more power. I don't like that approach for Jeff, because we see Jeff. We know how his at-bats sometimes go, right? Sometimes in big situations, you got a man on third and first, right? And it's 2 outs. Jeff McNeil is going to swing at that first pitch. So are we saying Jeff McNeil isn't going to swing at the first pitch anymore? Because he notoriously swings at the first pitch. And that's kind of his approach to ambushing the hitter in his Ichiro type of swing motion. And I just don't like the fact that he's abandoned that over the last few years. That he's gone to this, I need to bring in some more pop. I don't understand the need for him to want to do that. Jeff McNeil cannot afford to be in that type of position where you have some young guys that are going to be on his back every single day. And now, if you're bringing up Luis Angel Acuna or you're bringing up a Ronnie Mauricio, you're not bringing them up to rot on the bench. I said this in the last episode. Jeff McNeil's value to me is as a tremendous super utility player. He could play all three outfield positions, which, the majority of it is left and right. And he could also play, some second base, some third base, right? Some first base. So, maybe a little bit of shortstop. So I feel like Jeff's better suited for that type of role. I would love to see Acuna really get that opportunity to shine, because what we saw from him last year was great. And we're going to talk about Luis Angel Acuna a little bit, because in that stretch, it was a very small sample size, but I'm not going to sit here and ignore the importance of that sample size. Luis Angel Acuna came up in a very important stretch, playing the Phillies 7 times in 10 days, and he hit for tremendous, right? 308, 3 home runs, 6 RBIs, but pay attention to the inside the numbers, right? Which these are numbers you can see on the field, but these are not numbers that are going to pop your eyeballs out like home runs, RBIs, and batting average, right? The slugging and the OPS, which is what teams pay attention to now a little more than in the past, but slugging 641. That means triples, doubles, very, very key important base hits, not just slap singles and dunk bloopers, right? OPS was at 966, which means he's getting on base at a high clip and slugging at a high clip in that short amount of time. Now, this is someone who, again, wasn't that output wasn't coming for him in AAA. So to me, what that told me was this is a player who can easily get bored in AAA. Now, I get it. I understand. That's not a good look. It doesn't. But sometimes that happens. Sometimes when a player feels like he's just, where he wants to be at a certain level, he wants to get at that level, he feels like he's done everything he needs to do to get to that level, right? Where he's next man up, and I want to be next man up, right? That's when you get to see who that real player is. And the Mets threw this kid in the fire, playing those, in that stretch against the Phillies. And what they got from him was so important, especially at the time they got it as well. That's super huge, super big to get that type of production from Acuna in that spot. And what that means going forward, I don't know. But again, asking the manager if there's going to be a competition, which is what I want, because again, competition brings out the best of players. It'll bring out the best in both of those guys. But then the Mets go and re-sign Pete Alonso. And now that sticks Acuna, McNeil, and Ronnie Mauricio. We all know who Ronnie Mauricio is, right? We saw a little bit of him in the 2023 season when he got his little cup of coffee. And again, I don't like to pay attention too much to the plus stats. I'm not big in the plus stats. I don't like the WAR stat, because to me, that's not what you could see on the field, on the television, right? It doesn't pass the eye test for me. Now, Ronnie Mauricio passed the eye test for me because that exit velocity, that you can't teach, right? That's just natural. That just comes with the player, right? Now, his issue was really just making contact, putting the ball in play. Because when he does, you see what happens. Prodigious power, gets the ball out very, very quickly. Switch hitter, very important, very valuable. And so if he's playing that position, or if he could play that position, that's competition, right? And then you got Brett Baty. Now, truthfully, I really think that there's going to be a trade. It's going to be a trade of some sort happening at some point, because when you look deeper down the depth chart, you have Jet Williams. You have other guys that, they signed Nick Madrigal. Like, Now we're talking about a log jam at the second base position. Now, third base to me, that's Vientos all day long. Not touching that. Right? I don't care what people think about it. Defensively, he's not that big of a liability. I mean, Rafael Devers played third base, right? I mean, look at his output, right? Now they want to move him off that position. Now, I think he could get better. He's still young. He's only 26 years old. There's so much improvement that can come from Mark Vientos, right? So he's not moving out of that position. And so I think there's a lot that's going to happen. Now, this also factors in how many off days are they going to give Lindor. Now, Lindor is not someone who you need to be giving a lot of off days to because he's a creature of habit. So he needs to be playing every day to get into his rhythm, get into his feel. If he's taking days off here, taking days off there, he's not going to be productive. So you need Francisco Lindor every single day. So you're plugging him in every day. And, you're giving Vientos the majority of the reps at, third base. So now we got to look around the field. What are we talking about, right? So now something's got to give with that. So let's move to the other side of the diamond. Now we're going to be talking about first base. And first base, again, we mentioned this. We didn't know if it was going to happen. I felt like it was going to happen. It needed to happen. At least for this year, it needed to happen. Pete Alonso is back on the New York Mets. 34 home runs, a 240 average, which was better than the last 2 years. 91 RBIs, an on-base percentage of .329, and a slugging percentage of .459, which is a little more than half the way to 500, right? Couple points off of 500. You ideally want him to be 500 and above. But, Pete Alonso is a slugger, so, the RBIs and the home runs and the doubles are going to be there, but they need to be there at a more consistent rate. They need to be there in spots where it's going to put the team in position to succeed, not just grounding into double plays, which is what frustrated a lot of fans last year. But in the postseason, he showed something. He showed that he was about that. He's that dude, that he was built for it, And so Pete Alonso is the guy at first base, at least for this season, right? We don't know what's going to happen beyond that, but for this season, he's back. He's chasing the home run record for the New York Mets in their franchise, which sits at, I believe, is 256. So he's about 26 home runs away from that to tie it, and 27 home runs away from breaking that record, which, for all intents and purposes, we assume that Pete Alonso is going to break that record somewhere around, if he's having a tremendous season, where he's trending towards 50 or more, it's going to be around June. If he's having his typical season like he had this year, it might be towards the end of July, maybe beginning of August. And if he's having, better than that, because last year was the in-between, so if he's having better than that, where we're talking 45 to 50, then the middle of July is where he's going to get that. So I would pencil in somewhere around July where Pete Alonso is going to break that record. But that's your first base. So we've taken care of first base. We've taken care of second base and their big log jam. We've talked about the shortstop position. We talked about third base. We're going to get to one of my favorite positions, one of my favorite players here for the New York Mets, Francisco Alvarez. Young Francisco Alvarez is poised to bounce back on the offensive side. Defensively, we know what he provides. One of the best, if not the best, framers in Major League Baseball. Hopefully, he, has been working on, his blocking, because that's, with the framing, he sacrifices the blocking. If he can kind of just balance both of those out, he'll be one of the top premier defensive catchers. He has a strong arm, can throw anybody out if he really focuses hit on that aspect of his game. So he has the potential to throw anybody out. He's good, man. Kid is young. He's only 21, 22 years old. The kid is very, very young. One of the younger players on the Mets roster. And, last year was better on the batting average side, right? He hit 209 his first full rookie season. But he also had about 24 home runs. So last year he had 11, 47 RBIs. And a lot of that kind of points to his injury, right? He got injured when the Mets visited Los Angeles early in the season last year. And he injured his thumb, kind of like a, UCL of the thumb kind of injury, which takes some time to heal. And how that thumb affected him offensively, we don't know. But we think it had a lot to do with it because he didn't start breaking out until late July. So, it's really his breakout game was that Orioles game where he hit the walk-off home run against Sir Anthony Dominguez. So, that's we have to see, and I believe we're gonna see a better offensive production from Francisco Alvarez, but we're gonna see what that's gonna lead us to. The slugging 435, the OPS 710, and I think those numbers are, as far as those, the OPS and the slugging, I think those are going to be consistent with what he could provide. I think the slugging could be higher, somewhere around 450, 500, maybe 510. Around where Mark Vientos was last year. He has that potential. He's shown it. Now, I don't want him to always think home run all the time, but he is a catcher, and catchers sometimes have that ability. But I think he is, you could put him up there with some of the best catchers in baseball. I think he has that potential, and you'll see that from Francisco Alvarez in 2025. So we've gone over the infield positions, and we understand that Jose Iglesias is going to be missed. And, I would be remiss if I don't mention his impact. We got the OMG sign right there, and that was all because of him, but I will say this, right? I will say this. Jose Iglesias, as much as we love him, we understand that what the Mets have in their roster, it's gonna be, should be a lot better than what he can provide. Sometimes, these 1 year, I don't want to call him a 1 year wonder because he was such a magnificent clubhouse presence, but sometimes it's hard to say goodbye, and we had to say goodbye to such a great player because he was such a good clubhouse presence, and the performance and all that. But when you feel like you have better, you have to go with that. So I hope he finds some success. I'll be rooting for Jose Iglesias wherever he goes. His song will forever live in my playlist and in my home. So that's my message for Jose Iglesias. He's done so many good things. But that is the infield overview. There's a few other players that we didn't talk about, like Jet Williams. I didn't get too in-depth about because he just hasn't been healthy enough. Since getting called up to AAA, he did play in the Arizona Fall League, but there wasn't anything there to be impressed by. He is good. He is the Mets' #1 overall prospect, according to Baseball America. So, we're going to take a look at him. The team is going to take a look at him. We will assume that he will have a role in the team some way, somehow, as the season grows on. But again, like I said, there's a huge logjam. So we'll see what happens. There's been a lot of rumors of a trade, and one of these infield players can be dealt. And with the recent injury to Frankie Montas, that might be sooner rather than later. That'll do it for part 1 of the 2025 Mets overview, talking about the infield. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about the outfield, and that will be not as long as an episode, but we're going to dive deep into the options that the Mets have there. So we'll talk about Logan Gilbert. We'll talk about everybody that the Mets have for that position. They traded for Siri. They signed the biggest acquisition in Juan Soto, the franchise-altering player. Brandon Nimmo's still out there. We'll talk about his plantar fasciitis and how healthy he is from that. We're going to bring you so much more coverage. So again, follow on all the social medias. Don't forget to scan that QR code to listen to the podcast wherever you get your podcast today. Again, this is the Mets Live Show, and I am Rashid McDonald.